You had questions about DIY acoustic panels, and I've got answers. I'll be answering viewer questions about various details, and yes, I will finally be addressing mounting tips. If you want to join the Q&A, then join me for this episode of I Don't Have a Band right now. Welcome to episode 32 of I Don't Have a Band. Hey there, I'm Dan, the self-proclaimed lonely rocker, and I'm here today doing a video that I've been wanting to do for a long time. We're going to strip it down here. I'm not going to have my usual production value that I usually throw into my videos, where I'm just going to be answering some of your questions. The acoustic panel video was actually the first official video that I did on this channel. I had no idea how successful that video was going to be. I'm still trying to figure out why that video is so successful to apply that to some of my new videos. But at the time of the taping of this video, we're getting close to 200,000. I get questions almost daily. The video continues to perform. And number one, I want to thank you for all that support. I appreciate it. I did do a lot of research when I did that video because I was looking to find solutions for myself. And once I had consumed a lot of videos on the subject, I just sort of refined the formula a little bit for my needs and decided, hey, what a great place to start. So that was sort of the birth of the acoustic panel video on my channel that has since become a video on how to place them, how to test them. And recently I did a DIY acoustic panels 2.0 video. All of these videos that I'm talking about, I'm going to put links in the description. If you haven't seen them, I highly recommend that you check them out. Just love for you to see what's going on. And if I can help you, that's great. Anyways, one thing different about this video is I've actually got notes and I've got some visual aids. So let's see how this is going to go. So the first off, the thing I want to talk about first, I've had a number of comments mainly about whether or not these panels are challenging professional solutions. Now, as the title suggests, DIY. I was looking for something I could do myself. I'm a reasonably handy guy. I like tackling different projects. As I started building this home studio, I was trying to improve my own mixing skills and then recognize that perhaps I was having too many distractions in the room from reflections and things like that. So decided that I wanted to start treating the space a little bit. I highly respect professionals and professional studios who certainly don't need to hear about this from me. They're going to professionals, they come in, they take measurements around the room. And a mixing environment such as this specifically, you don't want to absorb everything. A good mixing environment is going to be a blend of absorption and diffusion, even some reflection. You really don't want a dead room, but you want it to be optimized for your mixing purposes. And different engineers like different things. In my case, I was just looking to absorb some frequencies. It was a little bit noisy in here, and I thought that these would help, and they actually have. But I do respect the professionals. If you've got the budget and you're taking the next step up, I mean, certainly, you can make these work. They do work, but again, professionals are professionals for a reason. And I do believe that, because there is this guy, I think he's got an acoustic panels company, and he started to weave his way into some of these videos and challenging some of these concepts. Buddy, I'm not trying to get in your way, but I never would have been a customer anyways. These are $20 panels. I built them myself, and they do a great job. So that's all these are for. So let's leave it there. The other thing that I want to touch on, I get a ton of questions about mounting tips. And I almost forgot that I said in that video that I would touch on that in a future video, and I never did. The reason I haven't jumped into it yet is there are so many variables. Honestly, these panels are not heavy. If you know how to hang a picture frame, you should have no problem hanging a panel. But generally people have questions because they have special case scenarios. And I'll give you a couple of examples and we'll jump into the questions. Yo Maxi wrote, hey, any tips on mounting these the easiest way without damaging the wallpaper on the wall? I suspect his wife might have something to do with that. And Ash Shaker Studios 1, when you need to hang them, not on a stud, what are you doing to hang them? And if your studs didn't match up on your clouds, how would you hang them? I guess he's hanging them on the ceiling. He wants to hit a stud. The typical drywall brackets they make are garbage and do not work worth a hill of beans. Okay. Plus, I put a huge hole in the wall, ripping it off altogether. Okay, so here's an example of a guy who's trying to hang clouds. He's suggesting that his studs perhaps are too far apart. The brackets he's using aren't working, and he ended up just creating holes in his ceiling. By the way, in that application, you could simply just run a crossbeam use a 2x4 or even a 1x4, secure them into the studs that you do have in the ceiling, and then you could hang your clouds off of that. You can paint it the same color as the ceiling, and that would give you some extra strength. If you can't hit a stud and you feel that you need to, there's my first mounting tip. Anyways, but that just gives you an example of how difficult this can be because people have different scenarios. But I promise, in this Q&A, I'm going to touch on mounting, but I'm going to make you work for it because I'm going to put that towards the end of this video. So if you want to see the mounting tips, make sure you stick around for that. All right, let's jump into the specific questions. Rob G wrote, how would you describe the improvement you gained by putting these in your studio? Well, I kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but one thing I started to realize is when I was making mixing decisions, I was being influenced by what I was hearing in the room. And the room was far more lively than I realized it was. Now, this room is mainly drywall. I do have carpet on the floor, and I have a cinder block wall on the other side. But it's straight walls, flat finish, and I didn't even have any pictures on the wall, so nothing to break up the frequency. So the first thing that I noticed when I installed my panels, and I remember this clearly because I sat down at my desk and listened to some of my mixes before, and then I went to install them. It only took me maybe a couple hours to get everything up. And the first thing I noticed is that the sound was definitely far more focused. I really felt the sound coming from in front of me, like they were coming from the speakers. I could really sort of feel the stereo spectrum, and really the best way I can describe it is that the sound was a lot more focused. So thanks a lot for that question. So the next topic I want to get into, and here's where I've sort of grouped a bunch of questions into topics. A big one I get is about the insulation material that I use inside of the panels. Now, I'm using rock wool insulation, also known as Roxul, which is a mineral wool based insulation. Not getting into the manufacturing process, but it's actually rock spun at very high speeds, and it's a modern replacement to fiberglass. So let's go through these questions, and I'll answer them one at a time. Mr. Who writes, thanks for the tutorial. Really appreciate if you would recommend rock wool or fiberglass for my panels. Owens Corning 703 was a material used by a lot of studios for many years. It is a fiberglass-based product. Now, I don't want to be anywhere near fiberglass, especially in a panel that's breathable. Those fibers get out. You don't want fiberglass in your lungs. It might be good with absorption, but that's not a risk that I do want to take. So I would highly recommend staying away from fiberglass. I Make You Say asked, is it safe to breathe in after a cloth is placed over? And 123 RKSS wrote, those fibers in the insulation are dangerous if inhaled. Having this in a studio getting shaken by bass will definitely stir up the air. Not sure how much protection the overlaying fabric will give you. And Broadbent wrote, don't you need to worry about breathing around the insulation? Even after you hang them up, wouldn't be bad for your health. After all, it's meant to be in wall cavities. Just asking because I really want to make these. Okay, so I did some research about mineral wool insulation. I actually spoke to somebody at Rockwool. Now, the first thing someone's going to say, well, if you talk to the manufacturer, of course they're going to tell you they're safe. But hear me out. This insulation was never intended to be inside acoustic panels. It's insulation meant to be part of the construction of a wall, as this gentleman said, inside a wall cavity, probably covered behind a vapor barrier to seal everything in. Mind you, I'll argue walls are not necessarily airtight, so if there are fibers, they will find ways to get out still, but that's the intended use. So if I'm in a manufacturer and someone comes to me and says, 1% of your customers are buying this product for something we never intended it to be used for, they could easily just say, read the packaging, use it the way it's supposed to be, and they could wash their hands with it. But in fact, they actually gave me a lot of time, and they sent me a lot of data and explained to me one important point, that mineral wool fibers are actually heavier than air. So if they do come out of the panel, they're simply going to fall to the ground. You vacuum them up, and that's the last you need to worry about them. Unlike fiberglass, which fibers are lighter than air, they will float around the air, get caught in your lungs. Plus, mineral wool, there's a lot of evidence to suggest, and a lot of research out there that says your body can actually clean out that material on its own, that it won't remain in your lungs. Now, I'm going to say I don't endorse the product. I've said it in my videos, in my comments, especially in the last video that I did. If you have any concerns, you're welcome to try other materials. You can talk to your doctor. You can talk to other professionals. Don't take my word for it. I'm not an insulation expert. I did my research and I'm satisfied with what I've discovered, but I do understand people are going to have concerns. So please, if you have any concerns at all, don't take my word for it. Talk to a professional and make sure with whatever material you're using that you're comfortable with it. And that's really all I can say about the insulation material. Hey, just interrupting myself for a second because I wanted to talk about the DIY Acoustic Panels 2.0 video. I made mention to that at the beginning of the video. There's two things in that video that I really want you to see. I built on the original design, but addressed two key components that viewers had concerns about. One of which was the insulation that we're just talked about, and how there's devices in that panel to keep the insulation inside better. And the other one is better absorption. People wanted bass traps and just thicker absorbers just to suck up more frequencies. So those two key points are addressed in the 2.0 video. So make sure to check it out. There's a link to that video in the description below. And let's get back to the show. I've got a couple of general build questions. Thomas Magruder asks, great job, but how do you know what size to make? I chose 2x4. 2x4 panels are pretty standard if there is such thing in acoustic panels. The reason they're standard is that that's the size you need to fit the insulation. If you want to start cutting and trimming insulation, you can make it any size that you want. But a 2 foot by 4 foot panel, by the way, I do live in Canada and we are on metric system here, but construction materials are imperial, so you're welcome to use your conversion calculator. I've had a few people call me on that. Anyways, a 2x4, 2 foot by 4 feet, 24 inches, 48 inches. That just conforms to the size of the insulation. So you can make your panels any size you want. You can make them taller if you've got a taller room. I mean, you can double up. You can make them 2x4 and stack them. I just think they're a manageable size. It conformed to the media that I had on the inside of the panel and just made the construction easier. But 2x4 is generally considered a standard size for an acoustic panel. Camilo Valendia asks, how much do these weigh? I weighed this panel just before this video, and this is 11.8 pounds. So we're talking 1x4 construction. Sorry, the lumber is 1x4. As I mentioned, it's a 2x4 panel. We've got one bat of rock wool insulation inside. There is a brace on the back, a little bit of fabric, and that's going to get you close to 12 pounds. Joshua Walderbach asks, what fabric did you end up using? I got burlap, but I'm not fond of how it feels or looks and doesn't like working with it. Listen, burlap sucks, okay? I don't know why people are using burlap. Maybe the first acoustic panel video out there, they chose burlap as their wrap material. I think burlap is ugly. It's messy. It's kind of scratchy. Stay away from burlap. There's a lot of better options out there. And what fabric did I end up using? So interesting, this fabric is actually upholstery fabric. So this is something you would find on the outside of a chair or a couch. And it's kind of a rigid texture to it. It's not, some fabrics will crease easily. This won't crease. When you fold it, it kind of holds its shape a little bit. And like I said, it's kind of rigid. So when I was wrapping around the panels, it just didn't crease. And what I didn't realize, and when I brought a sample of this to the place where I bought it, there's actually a rubber coating on the inside of the fabric. And that's designed so the fabric doesn't slip when it's wrapped around a chair or something like that. It's designed so it doesn't slip. And actually that's an additional layer on the inside of the fabric. It's still very breathable though. And I'm going to touch on that in a second. Ovo Nisamja. Isn't this fabric too thick? I've talked to a guy who works for a company which designs studios, and he says it's supposed to be how they call it, acoustically neutral. Kevin Everding said, what do I need to look out for when choosing a fabric? I'm guessing it has to be acoustically transparent, but how would I know what it is and what isn't? Thanks again. Great video. In a DIY situation, when you're making your own panels and you're going to a fabric store to buy your fabric, the thing you need to make sure is that it's breathable. Okay, hold the fabric up to your mouth, blow through it. If you can feel your breath on the other side, that means air's passing through it. That means sound is going to pass through it. I would stay away from vinyls and from leathers and from plastics. You'll just turn these panels into reflectors. So acoustically neutral, you're looking to absorb frequencies. You don't want it to bounce off, so you're not going to put tin foil on the top. So any fabric that's breathable, and as I mentioned, that this one, it's a thicker, sort of rigid material, but it's still very breathable. I think it's doing its job to contain the materials inside pretty good, but sound frequencies are still going to get through it. Don't worry about acoustically neutral. Just as long as it's breathable, you'll have an absorption panel. Time to thrive. Where did you get your fabric from which you wrapped your panel? As I just said, a fabric store. People love to make clothes. They like to make furniture. There are stores dedicated to selling fabric. I know some people are thinking it's a sound company that's selling the fabric, where there is fabric that is made for that purpose. But you can go to any old fabric store. You'd be surprised what you can find there. Like I said, I found this upholstery fabric, not realizing what it was. It was a clearance item. It was a great price. I like the color. It has kind of this herringbone pattern in it. It kind of looks like a cheap suit. So I thought that would do a great job. But if you go to a fabric store, you're going to see all kinds of fabrics, paisleys and florals and corduroys and all kinds of stuff. I had never really spent a lot of time in a fabric store, but just search Google for your local fabric store, and chances are you're going to find something that'll work great for your panels. Okay, so the next series of questions I'm going to tackle here is about the backing material. There have been a number of questions about that, so let me just read a couple of them here. Peter Bata, sorry if I'm mispronouncing these names. Any particular reason why you couldn't apply the backing material before wrapping your rigid fabric? Thank you for sharing your time and experience with us. So if you watch my my acoustic panel video, I talked about putting the backing fabric on last, and I was saying being very careful not to wrap your outer fabric. You've done all the work, you put this other fabric on the back, be careful. So people are kind of calling me on that, saying, well, why don't you just put the backing fabric on first? Like Mr. Punk Duck says, put the back fabric on first, then you don't have to worry about cutting through it or seeing it from the other side. L2112 Life Z, something like that, highly suggest putting the backing on first. You can cover the seam with your top fabric and you don't have to worry about damaging the top. Okay, so this is where I stand on the backing fabric. And now that I've had a chance to think about it, when I decided to put it on last, it's just what I did at the time. But after I constructed these, I've actually created some clouds that are hanging over my desk. And throughout the talk of some of the concerns about health, I was wondering if some particles were falling down from my cloud. So I decided to test some different materials. So I wanted to perform some surgery. If you put your backing fabric on last, if you ever need to open the panels, let's say you want to change the material, or in the case one of my panels actually fell off the wall, I brushed against it, it fell, and the material inside got dislodged, you can open it up from the back. If you put the backing fabric on first and then wrap everything around, yeah, you can cut into it. But in this case, my backing fabric's on last. I can get into it from the back, replace the backing fabric, and not have to disturb the fabric on the front. If I had it the other way around, yeah, I could still open it, but then I have to put another bit on top, and it's another layer. So I just found, just through a practical example, is I had to perform surgery. So having the backing fabric on last, I was able to open it, not disturb the outer fabric, get the backing back on, put it up, and it was a quick fix. So I'm standing behind my idea of a backing fabric last. Certainly you can do it the other way around, but that's why I do that. We're now going to tackle soundproofing versus sound absorption. Nyan Hitet asked, could this be used on the floor to block my downstairs neighbor's noise? Albert C. wrote, I have a 25-inch flat screen TV sitting on a dresser. If I hang this panel on the wall right behind the TV, would it block some of the TV sound so it wouldn't bother the adjacent rooms sharing the same wall? I understand it won't block the sound completely. And George Grant wrote, bro, great video. I'm here because my fridge is driving me nuts. I'm going to surround it with this. Airflow through. Okay. Soundproofing versus sound absorption or sound treatment. Soundproofing is a completely different thing. If you're looking to block sound or prevent sound from getting out, studios are built, whether it's a tracking room, especially a mixing room, where you want to contain the sounds. You want to keep outside sound from coming in, and you want to keep the inside sound from going out. You're actually building a room within a room. You can search YouTube for this. There's a lot of videos on studios, and they show the construction process of really creating an isolated room. And really the idea of having a room built inside a room space. There's air gaps, all of the seams in the room. There's special materials they use to seal it. The air vents and the electrical outlets. There's a lot of places where sound can escape. So no, these panels are not soundproofing. They're designed to make the room sound better to you. You're in the room, you're making music, or it's your home theater. You're looking to control the reflections. It makes it sound better to you. Basically controlling reverberations and unwanted frequencies. Someone on the other side of that wall, it's going to be just as loud with or without the panels. It's not going to make a difference. So please don't confuse soundproofing with sound absorption, which is what these are doing. It's absorbing the reflections. It's not actually absorbing the sound. Okay, if you made it this far, I'm finally going to tackle mounting. Again, sorry this is not a dedicated video, but I explain why I haven't done it, but I'm going to cover off a couple of things here best I can, at least to give you some tips if you're struggling there. Now, as with making the panels, I mean, there's some basic skills that you need to make the panels. Now, this is not a hard project. If you're looking to start making your own things, this is actually a great first project to do. I highly recommend getting some scrap materials, practice cutting, measuring, making sure, it's straight, even screwing in a screw if you've never done it before. If you've got to drill pilot holes, there are certain types of screws that you can get where you don't actually have to drill pilot holes. There's a lot of different variables, and I'm not a construction channel, so I don't really want to get into those concepts too deeply, but I will offer some pointers now. So let's just go through a couple of the questions. Kevin Everding wrote, I'm just about to give this a go, just wondering, how did you mount the panels in the corners? There's a great question. Okay, if you saw my panel placement video, you've met this guy.
Hey, dude.
This is my my acoustic panel install helper. All this is once I had determined the height of my panels, I created this out of a 2x4, and I made sure that this was level. So basically, if I sit the panel against the wall on here, the height is set, that I don't have to keep measuring. Now, that opened up a lot of different opportunities. It made it easier to install things in the corners as well, where I could sit that on the floor, I could sit the panel in the corner, and then what I did was, I took these right angle brackets and I bent them to about 45 degrees, and I was able to put them on the panel in the corner. I'll just show you here. So I bent them to 45 degrees, and then I drilled a screw on a diagonal just to create the sort of 45-degree bracket on the back of the panel on both sides. But I did it with this sitting on this little platform, so I could actually measure, make sure that they were flush. So if you can imagine, the panel is sitting in the corner, and then those L brackets are bent to 45, so the back sides are actually resting against the wall. And then with this in place, I was able to mark with a pencil underneath the bracket. I marked in the center of just of one side, and then I went back, drilled some holes, and then if you're working in a room with drywall, come on, if you've hung a picture before, then you've seen drywall anchors. They come in all different shapes and sizes. This one, you can actually screw it into the drywall. This one, you drill a hole maybe a little bit smaller. You can kind of tap that in, and then you put your screw into the anchor. You can use one of these, hang it like a picture. So in the case of the corner, as I said, used these L brackets, made them 45 degrees, installed them on the back so that they were flush with each adjacent wall, just marked where they would sit, and then I put a screw which would sit right underneath, so it ends up sitting on it. That's all I did. And then just wedge it into the corner, make sure it's sitting on screws on both sides, pull your little helper out, it's hanging in the corner.
Yeah.
I'll just go through a couple of different things to think about in terms of actually the mounting hardware. Now, you can go to your Home Depot or whatever your major hardware store, even small hardware store, and you just need some kind of hanger. But basically, I just took this flat bracket and I put 2 screws in there, and I actually used those drywall plugs just to kind of keep it in place. You don't even have to do that. There's all kinds of different hangers you can buy. You want to center it near the top of the panel. And when you're measuring your height, just make sure you account for, don't measure at the top of the panel. You got to account for the difference of where that bracket is. But you really just need one bracket. Make sure it's securely fastened to the back side of your panel. And then with one screw in a drywall anchor, then you're good to go. If your walls are made of different materials, actually this side, it's actually a cinder block wall. I use a thing called a Tapcon, where I used a bit on my drill that can drill into cinder block or concrete, and using these Tapcons are special screws that can screw into the concrete, and they grip pretty good. So that's what I did on the cinder block wall. As you can see, there's all different materials. I mean, walls are made of different things. I mean, if you're in a log cabin, well, you can probably just screw it right into the wood and hang it. That'll be perfectly fine. So really a big consideration is drywall. You don't want to just put a nail in the wall and hang it, because it could fall. So definitely use drywall anchors. But honestly, if you're making standard panels, they're only about 12 pounds. So if you've hung a picture before, you can hang a panel. Another thing that you want to consider when you're, what I did is because I made these sort of large brackets, so the panel actually hangs off the wall a little bit, I got these little rubber feet, and I put them at the bottom of the panel. So when I hang the panel on the wall, I keep the screw out maybe 3/4 of an inch out from the wall, and when I hang it, and then I put these rubber stoppers on the bottom, so the panel is actually off the wall a little bit, and that's actually good to do. It gives you that little bit of an air gap. The insulation in here is about 3 inches, and the panels are 4 inches thick, so there's already a natural air gap as it is, and then that little extra, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch that you're going to get from the rubber stopper, the panel is going to be hanging off the wall a little bit. So it's good to have that little air gap, because any frequencies that go through the panel and hit the wall, they're going to bounce back. They're going to go right back through the same absorber and hopefully minimize those reflections. And the last thing I want to cover is ceiling clouds. That's a more complicated project. If you've never, if you're struggling hanging a panel on the wall, you're going to think twice before hanging clouds, because it can be a little more complicated, obviously, because you're dealing with gravity. What I ended up doing is I got these toggle bolts. Now, toggle bolts are pretty cool. They come basically with this little flexible part on one end, and then there's a long screw. But what I did was I found a threaded hook, and I replaced the bolt that's in there with a hook, so it has the same thread. And the idea with the toggle bolt is you make once you've marked everything off and you know where you want to hang your panels. I drilled a hole in the drywall in the ceiling, just big enough to get the toggle bolt through. And then what happens is once you pop it in, it pops open, and it's a good secure way to hang things from the ceiling. Again, if your ceiling is strong enough to do that, if you can get into the studs, that's probably the best thing to do. And like I said, if you're concerned, if you know where the studs are, you can run cross beams from, if you're not really worried about aesthetics, you can do it in a way that it looks nice, and screw the wood into the studs. And then really you can hang your clouds anywhere. If you can't hit a stud, that's a good way to do that. Maybe the material up there is not strong enough. But if you're confident that the drywall is strong enough, this was actually pretty easy. Once I marked the hanging spots, I used two of these, and then I hung a chain hooked to two corners of the panel. So really it's hanging from just two of these toggle bolts. Again, you just make a hole just big enough to pop it through, and these will secure nicely. I've had two panels hanging now for well over a year, haven't had any issues, and that's a good solution for hanging your clouds. But again, we all have different materials. Maybe you have exposed beams. Just think about, if there's any chance that thing's going to fall, the last thing you want to do is what have happen is have that panel fall on your head. Well, there's my first Q&A. How did I do? I'm sure I'll hear from some of you. I did my best to answer as many questions as I could. I didn't want this video to be too long. But hope that I helped you. I know the mounting thing is a bit dodgy, so I gave you a few tips. I will continue to think about it. If I think of a way to present it in the future, perhaps that will see the light of day at some point. But thanks so much for your time. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for the views. This video has been so successful, and I'm really thrilled that you see me as an authority. It's now one of the most successful acoustic panel videos on YouTube, and that's awesome. But I've got tons of other stuff here on the channel, a lot of home recording tips, a lot of gear reviews. I'm starting to step into different stories, musical related stories. So please like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Check me out on Patreon, and I hope to hear from you soon, and definitely hope to see you again in the next video. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and please like, subscribe, and ring that bell to stay up to date. Remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll. There are a lot of great musical projects you can do by yourself, right from your own home. I hope to see you again next time.